In this video, we're going to be talking about how to combat perfectionism. So there is this concept out there that perfectionism is what we should combat, because when we start to strive for perfectionism, for some people, it can paralyze us to prevent us from even beginning. And this is definitely true. You know, there are people who are scared to get started, or just who are just so organized that they can't get going, or they can't really do everything really well because they're too focused on perfection. And so I think one thing that might be able to help is just understanding that perfectionism is okay, and that it's not something that's necessary. More importantly, I think understanding the detail behind it rather than just telling you could be useful. So for instance, let's take fitness, food, nutrition, or a lot of elements of life, but let's just focus on those: fitness, food, nutrition, exercise, and sleep. Those are very similar categories, but they cover large areas of life. Unfortunately, what seems to occur is that many people are so perfectionist in what they do that they never really succeed or excel, because they're more focused on the little minutia, the small things, rather than actually make considerable progress. So for instance, some people will say, oh, I can't sleep unless there's no light in my room, because I read in a study that we were naturally, for thousands of years, accustomed to sleeping in the dark when the sun went down. Now, arguably that is true, because when there's artificial light, that's one of the primary reasons why we stay up so late, because we can just turn on these lights and it looks like daytime, and therefore our body thinks, oh, it's still daytime, so we stay up later and later. And that's kind of what happened ever since the invention of the light bulb, an unexpected negative consequence. Unfortunately, people, for whatever reason, all of a sudden they hit the other extreme, where if there's a tiny bit of glimmer of light or a tiny bit of sound, they can't do it for them. And I think that level of perfectionism is too much. You want to avoid these extremes. So I've had a lot of sleep issues, and yes, one of them was because of all the artificial light that was turned on. More primary reasons had to do with addictions to the computer and other elements of my life that I had to cover. But artificial light was definitely one of those things, because when the sun went down, I could turn this on. So what's the point of that whole example? Is to show you that you don't need to sleep in artificial darkness, because guess what? Humans outside, for thousands of years, there was numerous different elements of sunlight or moonlight or some type of light available, whether it was a fire or the moonlight shining down. Plus, if you were to ever go out into the wilderness or a forest or a natural area, there's a ton of natural sounds, from insects to animals. It's not pitch quiet either. So again, people fall into these extremes. Oh, I need complete silence. And of course, for some people, it can help based off what you do. And you have to mix and match, but you have to understand that good enough is good enough. And something that's, let's focus now to something that's really detrimental: perfectionism in certain elements of business. You know, in Facebook, for instance, they have these postcards all around the campus, and it's very well known that they do this. And it's one of the founders' core philosophies. And they have a bunch of them, but one of them says, good enough is good enough, or something like that. Like, good enough is better than perfect. And the point of it is that for such a fast industry, you have to be very quick. You have to be one of the first at movers and all sorts of stuff. And you can't be this person who's paralyzed by creating something perfect that you delay putting it out for 18 months because it's not perfect. More importantly, what might help you understand why this is a better root. I think one of the things is just a lack of understanding, is that if you don't ship it out, if you don't put it out there, you lack that feedback from other people. And you can think in your head and make all these theories on what you think perfect is, but that perfect is not what other people's perfect is, especially for business products and apps and so forth. In fact, a lot of the big apps like Instagram, these things were completely different from what they were when they started. Flickr did not start as a photo sharing app. Instagram didn't either. Both of them started because of they were doing something completely different. Bourbon was an alcohol app, and they had a tiny feature that was photos. Same thing with Flickr. They weren't an alcohol app, but they had their own homepage and all sorts of features. Both of them noticed over time that all the customers cared about was the pictures element. So they did something that most people aren't aware of doing, which is they took a step back. They realized that this is incredibly important. Why don't we listen to what they think is more useful? And they changed it to feature primarily just photos. Most people would have just left it there and just said, oh, that's cool. Our photo sharing component's really useful. Let's just, keep it there, but we'll keep with what we believe is best, which is this whole picture of this alcohol homepage. And I think that's one of the things that keep arrogant people from succeeding. They believe that their ideas are so perfect that they're not humble enough to listen to other people. And for companies that are just starting out or forming ideas, this seems to be a critical component to learn from others. So as you can see, perfectionism, especially for like tech and engineer related things in business, it's more about putting things out there, getting feedback, and iterating constantly rather than being perfect. I think another great thing is just understanding that perfectionism and paralysis of putting things out there and releasing things prevents you from practicing, and practicing is incredibly important to you getting better at something. So whether it's art, whether it's blogging, whether it's making YouTube videos, I have met hundreds of people who are now very successful in those areas that I just mentioned. Not, generally speaking, not in person, usually through just learning about them. But one of the big pieces of advice they always give is that I screwed up horribly numerous times with my first 100 or 500 or 1,000 blog posts or YouTube videos. They were complete garbage. But when I got them out there, I iterated and I kept practicing and I got better and better. If you're not constructing the things and putting them out there and practicing, then how do you get better? That doesn't necessarily mean you always have to release them to the public, but sometimes maybe a little bit of feedback from people whose knowledge you value, or getting some type of feedback to see if it correlates with your end goal, that could be useful. So I guess the exception would be YouTube, where maybe you want to see how many views this gets, so you release it just to test things out. That could be a gauge of your goal, but maybe your goal is just to impact people or get feedback from the right people and impress people. So your goal may not be views, but just deep impact with the right artists or people. So that might require you not releasing it to the public, or just, showing it to people who your opinion you value. Sometimes the general public's opinion sucks. But again, you can see that these things are huge elements of success. Another great example of this would be art and music. In fact, if you study a lot of the most successful artists, whether it's Picasso, Vincent van Gogh, Mozart, when they started out, oftentimes, not all of them, but many of them, they copied others, and their first 100, 1,000 pieces were garbage. They were really bad. They were really mediocre. But you need that practice to get going and learn. So keep those things in mind. And of course, I will see you in the next video. If you're new to this channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button below this video for free updates, and I will see you later.